Welcome to Teaching That Counts, a podcast dedicated to the teaching and learning of mathematics. I'm your host, Abel Maestas, and I love to talk about math education. Together with my amazing guests, we'll explore several topics in the world of math teaching and student learning. Whether it's building thinking classrooms, healing math trauma, building student and teacher math confidence, or creating more equitable math workspaces. If it's going to help students learn math and teachers teach math, then we'll talk about it. So if you're a teacher, a parent like me, admin, or a coach like me, I hope you find something that can inspire you and help build your practice listening to this podcast. You can always find us online at www.teachingthatcountspodcast.com. Yeah, I know that's long, but hey, that's the URL. You can find me on YouTube at Maestas Math or on socials at Maestas Teach. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. All right, welcome everybody to the Teaching That Counts podcast. We are here in our final episode of season 3. It's been an awesome year with some amazing guests, and I've just appreciated everybody that's come on, everybody that's talked about math education, what we can be doing in our classrooms, and I've just learned so much over the course of this year. I'm excited to finish off the season with a great guest, so you'll get a chance to listen to this podcast and hear a great guest that's actually I think it's going to be a great bridge from all the stuff that we've talked about this year into my series for next year. So this will be the first time since, I guess, the first season when I did Building Thinking Classrooms. This will be the first time I really go back to a series, and I really think it's going to be something special next season. So we're going to be on a break for a couple of months, June and July. Although, if you guys are all lucky out there, I might post a June podcast on some of the experiences that I have in summer school. I know last year I had some summer school stuff here too, so maybe I'll post that on June. But we will take a break for the summer and come back in August. And in August, we're going to start talking about the 8 NCTM practices, effective math teaching practices. And so what I'd like to do is devote each episode to one of those 8 practices. I think a lot of teachers out there are looking towards that. And I know in my own district, we're doing PD specifically on that. They're called out in the California framework and the new math frameworks. So I think some podcast PD for people out there that listen to the podcast might appreciate a focused series. So next season is going to be focused. Each episode is going to be focused on one of those practices, and we'll do a deep dive. And my guest today, which you'll hear about some amazing things that we can do in our classroom, we're going to start that discussion about some of those 8 practices, but really mainly on one of them, which is probably the biggest one, I think, to help students become problem solvers, critical thinkers, reach those standards for math practice that we're always trying to get kids to do. So I think you're going to enjoy today's podcast, and I think you're really going to connect with my guest today. So I'd like to introduce my guest. My guest today his name is Karou. He's a senior director of product and content for Mind Education. He leads a team of learning and game designers, artists, mathematicians, developing next generation of ST Math's interactive programs, which is really exciting. I'm hoping that we can talk a bit about EdTech, especially in mathematics. He's been designing neuroscience-driven EdTech solutions for over a decade. And prior to joining Mind, he founded Beyond Math, an education company focused on teaching math in unique and non-traditional ways. Kai has spoken at SXSW edu, and written articles for the Huffington Post. So that's pretty cool. And Kai, I know that you got an engineering degree from right down the road from where I am, at University of California, Berkeley. So I'm not sure if you're in California now, but California guy here, and welcome back on the show here to California. And so, Kai, just introduce yourself for all the listeners and let them know what you've been doing.
Yeah, great. And I am in Southern California now, no longer in the Bay Area, though I definitely have a heart for the Bay Area as well. Um, it's great to be here. So, a little bit about me. I've always been kind of a math geek my whole life. I was really into, though, I was very turned off on math in school because I was very into puzzles, riddles, building Legos, doing logic problem, all of these activities that were all around mathematical thinking. Yet my education, and I don't know what your experience was personally, but math class was pretty much devoid of that, right? It was all here's a step-by-step procedure to follow, and here's tell us what the answer is. And so I could see that there was a much better way of teaching out there, and I won't belabor my whole background, but anyways, over the last decade, I've been with Mind Education and been really focused on how do you teach kids via problem solving. We're really focused on how the brain learns, so leveraging neuroscience research, and then that brings us to really leverage visuals, and we build puzzles to teach kids math, millions of kids across the country, and lots of really exciting work. I work with a very dynamic team, and we're just constantly thinking about how do we solve this big math education problem that we're all challenged by.
Yeah, I was talking to a colleague of mine, and she was telling me this story. And actually, I had her on the podcast. She might have told this story. She said that um, her daughter had had said, I don't like math. Like, Mom, I don't like math. And in a few minutes later, her son is like giving her some stuff, and she's like, give me another problem. Give me another problem. And it dawned on her, it's like, no, she doesn't, you don't not like math. You don't like school math.
Right.
And I think that's the crux of the situation that you talk about is how do we transform school math into something that's going to be, I, I like to use the word joy and wonder, but something that's going to allow students to not think that like, nah, I hate math. I just that always has struck me. I hate math. So what are some of the things that you guys do at Mind? Not that this whole podcast is a advertisement for Mind, but I've seen Mind at some of the conferences that I've gone to, and so I'm really interested in like just some of the little things that both Mind can add to teachers' repertoire, but also that maybe not Mind, but what can teachers do to help kids be problem solvers, have that discourse in there, so they're not coming home saying, I hate math.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll give you two things that immediately jump out, right? I mean, you talked about problem solving, and I think the big shift, and we've seen this across, I mean, this is where we're going in math education, is 50 years ago, you learned math in order to learn how to be a calculator, in order to calculate, right? I mean, that was the skill that was needed. We are no longer in that generation. When we look at how math is utilized in personal lives, in professional settings, it's all within the context of problem solving. And so if problem solving is not interwoven into the fabric of math, then we're missing the boat on where we're going. And what's great is that problem solving is actually a very engaging process. So we focus a lot on student engagement. And we studied games. I've studied games for years because kids are hooked on games, right? And there's certain aspects that games do. If you notice games, all they are is problems for kids to solve. They're just contextualized problems, a series of problems that kids get to solve. They tend to have low floor and high ceiling components to them. They tend to have, one of the things I'll also emphasize is they tend to be authentic problems. There's such a push towards this idea of real world, but you don't need it to be real world to be a meaningful problem. I'd actually, and this is one thing we focus on, it's actually much better to have a fake world task, but a meaningful task that kids authentically want to engage in rather than trying to focus on this real world problem that isn't even actually real world. So that's what we really focus on is we focus on engaging kids in authentic, meaningful tasks that they can access, and that becomes the crux, and we have a very high amounts of student engagement with our programs.
Yeah, I like what you say there in meaningful because I think that many school districts, including mine right now, they talk about relevance, right? Like there has to be some relevance, but I think that the word relevance gets misconstrued for real life
Right.
context where it could relevance to some students I've seen many students, they're drawing anime, right? Or they're drawing fantasy. Like that could be relevance. And so what can you dive just a little bit more into the gaming world and like how maybe we could be doing some tweaks in our classroom to bring more gaming and play? I I know that the elementary teachers out there like they have resources, I think, to bring in play
Mm-hmm.
to their classroom. I think that high school, secondary tends to not want to bring what I call play into the math classroom. So, how can, I guess let's take a secondary lens to it. What could they be doing to bring in more play into the math classroom?
Sure. So when I think about play, I think about play as a culture, right? You think about like when kids learn to play soccer, you don't start by doing drills. You start by just kicking a ball around. And I think this is part of the challenge with this too, is when you're engaged in play, there's not necessarily a learning outcome, right? You're just actually engaging with the core medium itself. And ultimately, it's those kids that just played around and kicked a soccer ball that are going to be the best soccer players, right? So when you want to set up an environment and play, and I'm in California too, and it's interesting. One of the areas that's part of the California framework is this idea of big ideas, right? And how do you dive in? How do you create big idea tasks? And one of the things we've been exploring is this idea of big idea investigations, where you actually have tasks that are all around playing with the mathematics. There's not even necessarily a learning outcome that you're aiming for. I mean, what you're aiming for is really this bridge and interconnection of all these different standards, which is what the core of a big idea is. But the way that you're engaging in that is it's not that there's a specific learning outcome for that lesson. It's about playing with the medium, engaging with the problem, and then engaging in discourse around it. And it's taking that kind of culture and mindset to mathematical problem solving. I think you could turn any math problem into a playful environment just by the way you approach it and frame it.
Yeah. So how can let's let's think you've done a lot of work in ed tech, right? So like you've got a lot of ed tech background and I don't have a ton of ed tech background. I'm kind of old school in terms of like writing and getting stuff but I love the idea of being able to bridge some of those technical tools. For instance, Desmos, I really like bringing Desmos into the classroom for kids. And again, I have a bit of a secondary lens because that's what I do most often is secondary. So, are there any, we've been talking a bit about problem solving. Problem solving is really big. And I'd like to kind of bridge this problem solving and discourse idea because I think that many teachers I've worked with struggle with getting kids to talk and um, to collaborate. And so, are there any like ed tech tools that could help the teachers get kids to talk more?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm going to give you a little math joke here about talking
All
about
right,
math.
we
It's
love math jokes.
We love math jokes. It's hard to get kids talking in class. It's hard squared to get kids talking in math class. I mean,
That's right.
getting kids talking about math is a challenge, 100%, right? The foundation of that is actually having a meaningful. So, when I think about ed tech, I think about ed tech should be a tool in order to serve a learning purpose, right? There's so often ed tech is used as some flashy idea or just some purpose form of engagement, and it actually doesn't deepen the learning experience that students are having, right? So foundational, what you want to do to get kids talking is you have to have a meaningful task that they actually want to talk about, right? It's kind of like if you're going to join a book club, if the book club is about some like airline, manual that you read on, like it's not going to be a very engaging discussion. It's the engagement of discussion is going to be based on the richness of the actual book that you're reading. And so similarly, you want to start with an engaging task. I do think that I'm a big fan of interactive lessons, right? So Desmos is an example like that. We've actually built out, so we're actually just launching a core curriculum ourselves. It's called Insight Math across K6 in California, and are releasing that nationally. And we actually also built an interactive lesson platform that allows kids to interact on their devices and submit their work. I think one of the things that I've seen, because I've done a lot of testing of this in classrooms, that's been super powerful is when you have kids that are able to do a task and then they can see their own work, and especially you put multiple pieces of student work side by side next to each other and you ask kids to describe what's similar and what's different. It's such an easy way to engage students because one, they just did that task themselves, right? So there's already a buy-in because they've engaged in that medium and thought about it. Two, there's something about comparing what's similar and what's different that just automatically engages you as a student and as a class because you're having to do a form of like compare and contrast and look for similarities and differences that's very different when you're just saying describe this specific situation. So that is a very specific tool. I mean, there's multiple interactive classroom platforms that enable that, and that's one of the simplest, easiest ways that I've seen as a teacher. If you're struggling with discourse, have kids engage with a task, put multiple responses up, have them talk about what's similar and different. Immediately, kids will start engaging in discussion.
That's such a great idea. It seems like the task itself is like your foundation. You've got to start with a task
100%.
and an engaging task. What are some resources that teachers can use to find open and engaging tasks? I've had this question given to me from many teachers, like, we need to find more engaging tasks. And many times I'll say, you guys need to look at the instructional materials that we have because there's some great materials. I'm wearing a T-shirt right now that says mid-school math. That's one resource. I just had April Mouton on from IM illustrative mathematics. We use Open Up. There's a lot, and I'm really interested in your curriculum instructional resources that are coming out too, because I know that the state of California is releasing their list of approved, and so I was wondering also is yours looking to be approved by the state? So, gosh, I had a question in there somewhere about, about materials. So where could we find some engaging tasks?
I can address a few of those. And yes, we did submit for California adoption, and that list will be released in November.
Awesome.
So we're very hopeful about that process. As far as tasks, there are so many that are out there, right? I mean, so many. You can go to like UCube, for example, has a bunch, like you said, illustrative mathematics, there's a bunch of tasks. One of the things we actually provide, and it's a discourse tool as well, we provide it for free, is it's called Puzzle Talks. So what we do, one of the foundational things we do is we build visual puzzles. So we take a problem, a math problem, and we turn it into a purely visual, what we call a spatial temporal puzzle that allow kids to engage in the math. It starts with there's no language and actually no numbers often on the screen. It's just like blocks on the screen. And you have to problem solve with that. And so those are a set of mini lessons. There's a number of them free online if you go to our website, mindresearch.org. Those are awesome, rich, engaging tasks because what's cool about puzzles is kids just want to jump in and talk about them right away, right? They've got a character, right? They're all visual. It's a medium that kids want to jump in. I will share also, I give a number of talks across the country, and one of the components I bring is how do you turn problems into puzzles? So there's actually a secret formula that you could take any problem, even a basic problem, like here's a rectangle, you can see the rectangle visually, what's the area, what's perimeter, and there's a process of turning any problem into a meaningful puzzle. Do you want to guess what that is, or would you like me to share that with you?
I think I'm gonna let you share it with me because I don't want to guess and then look like.
That's okay. I give you that grace. When I go and do conferences, I have everybody guess and share out ideas.
Guess. Okay. Let's see. I'll guess. You said there's a trick to it.
There's one subtle trick. So we've been building puzzle problems for years, and there's one subtle trick that you could almost turn any problem into a puzzle, right? It gives it a more puzzle-like feel of the problem, makes it more open, meaningful for kids.
Okay, I'm gonna say, make it open-ended and take out any pictures or clues. That's what I'm gonna say.
Yeah, no, good guess. And there's many things you can actually do. So let's use this specific example. So if I've got an area, you can imagine, let's say I've got a 5x4 rectangle, right? and I say, what's the area and what's the perimeter? Very standard, straightforward problem, right? I'm just going to multiply or count the blocks in order to figure out the area is 20 and find the perimeter. If I were to flip that, so if you instead say the area of a rectangle is 20, go ahead and find the rectangle. Now suddenly it's no longer a routine task. Now suddenly I have to discover what the rectangle actually is. And in this case, I could actually discover multiple rectangles, and we could have a discussion about multiple rectangles. And just the nature of that task, you're changing it from this procedural task to something that's now inviting multi-step thinking, open-ended thinking. Kids can be more creative. You can do this with a standard algorithm too. So imagine I have a problem, let's say 132 plus 24. Okay, 132 plus 24, I'm going to add, the ones column. If you were to just sub out, so let's say 132, you made the 3 blank, and then you made plus 24, you made the 4 blank, and then you actually gave the answer. Suddenly, now this is a non-routine problem. The way you think about it is completely different. Rather than just engaging them in addition, they're now engaging in addition, subtraction, multi-step thinking. And so it's really all you're doing is just playing with the unknown, right? And so if you know that as a teacher, one of the most effective tools I can do to swap a task is just play with the unknown. That allows me to take any textbook, any curriculum I'm working with, any task, and if I just play around with what the unknown is, I can automatically start to make a problem more engaging and meaningful for my students.
Yeah, play around with the unknown. That's what a great trick. So I always think I've been doing some building thinking classrooms with teachers, and sometimes we'll get something that's very skill based, right? And we want them to be able to almost like I would think I'm going to give you a high school example here, something like the power rule for derivatives. So we're talking calculus here, and what we'll do is instead of giving them like saying, well, this is the power rule, blah blah blah, this is how you do it, and then giving a bunch of examples. That's how we would used to do it. We
Right.
give them an example of what an example like something worked out, but then we don't tell them what is happening, and we just give them a few patterns, and we say, there's a rule here.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think it is? And then give it to them to figure out, and then they have to figure out what that rule is by matching patterns. So I see that as a similarity, although I think a step above that would be to something like you said with open middles is take a piece out and leave a blank and see what they fill in. I think that's a wonderful idea. That's why I love open middle problems.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome that you do that. I'll share an insight too that when you talk about calculus and integrals and derivatives, one of the things I mentioned is, we focus really big on like visual and spatial temporal problems. And I think oftentimes people can think about like, oh, well, visuals or concretes, well, that's more for like elementary school. But once I get up into middle and high school, it's really, let's get into the math. From going really deep on this, I've found ways of completely visualizing and actually creating interactives where you can show integrals and derivatives with no numbers, no formulas, just purely seeing the growth, the rate of growth of the growth. And anyways, it's fascinating what you can do with the visual mathematics too. So that's a huge area when we talk about problem solving and engaging students. The more they can put it in a visual medium, which is also universal, you don't run into language barriers that way, allows all students to access the math. That's a huge and powerful tool.
Yeah, visualization is a huge tool, one of those problem solving techniques. Which gets me to a question, and I had a teacher approach me the other day and asked me about problem solving. So he gave his AP students, since this is a not AP calculus, AP statistics. We're after the exam. He wants to just kind of give them some things to think about and some games and puzzles. And so he gave them a puzzle, and he was a little taken aback by what he felt was a lack of problem solving,
Mm.
of using different methods to try to figure this puzzle out, mathematical puzzle. So he asked me, he says he wonders if there's a way to talk about what it means to be a problem solver. Like we want kids to be a problem solver, but what does that mean? And
Right.
so I'm gonna pick your mind. What do you think problem solving means for kids? And when I say kids, I really mean like any kid, TK 12. What does it mean for a kid to be a problem solver?
Yeah, I love that. And gosh, so many things, but I will say there's one key component that jumps out to me when you say that, which is it's really that perseverance ability, right? It's this idea that when you're given a problem and you don't know how to do it, you just jump in and you tackle it and you try it and you keep going until you figure it out or you have to come back the next day. And it everyone knows about the idea of growth mindset versus fixed mindset and Carol Dweck's research. I'm sure you're familiar with
Right.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody in education has to be. I don't know if you know the original research that launched all of that thinking. It was done in the 1980s around this idea of actually what she coined then is learning goals versus performance goals. And this then eventually turned into this idea of mindset. But what it was is she actually studied a fourth grade math class and she'd studied the difference in how students interacted with problems that they didn't know how to solve. And what she noticed was there was this distinct difference between two groups where there were some students that they would get a problem they didn't know how to solve and they would just jump in and tackle it. And there was another group of students, and right, it wasn't exactly right. I mean, this was a gradation, but you were able to separate these groups. Another group that they were given the problem, and the moment they didn't know how to solve it, they just immediately didn't even try. And this was again done in the 1980s. This was the kind of the basis of a lot of the growth mindset research that we all know about today. And when I think about that, the way she framed this is actually that students had different goals. So she actually called this learning goals versus performance goals. Whereas the students that actually had a learning goal, their goal was to learn, their goal was to try things, they were the ones that were willing to then take an attempt and try and persevere on this problem, versus the ones that wanted to perform, to look good, to show that they had the right answer when they had something they didn't know they weren't even willing to try. And so when I think about problem solvers and the culture of building the problem solving, and again, like I said, this perseverance muscle, which is something that is near and dear to what we do, we really focus on like how do we create opportunities so that kids can persevere and try over and over again. It's how do you create an environment where kids can learn and kids can fail. And it's okay to fail at the problem. It's not about looking good or getting the right answer. And that's part of the magic of how you actually can start to cultivate a problem solving environment.
Yeah, absolutely. We want those kids to be problem solvers. And you mentioned perseverance. It's one of those, I think it's the first standard for math practice that we have for our kids. And as I mentioned in the introduction, the next season, I'm going to be focusing on each of the 8 math teaching practices that were outlined by NCTM. And 2 of those is productive struggle, allowing students to have productive struggle, which I think you kind of hinted at in um, in the learning goals and the performance goals. And the other one is facilitating math discourse, which is one I think we can talk about. How does facilitating mathematical discourse in class, like why is that so important to getting our kids to be problem solvers and allowing them to build that perseverance, allowing them to fail and move forward, and allowing them to have that productive struggle? Why does it make facilitating mathematical discourse so important?
Yeah, it's a great question there. And I just out of curiosity, did you have much discussion in math class when you were younger? What was your experience?
No, and you know what? It's my experience. It was the teacher talking, 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 and then here are some problems for you to work on. And if you want to talk to somebody, you can, but I'm not going to make you. Like that was pretty much every experience I had until I got to college. And then I got to college and it was lecture for 45 minutes. And then I went to a separate workshop and study group where we had to work in groups to do problems and work together and discuss how things were going. There was a little bit more, I would say, a little more active learning in college than there was in pretty much all of my schooling. I actually didn't go to public school. I went to Catholic school for my um, K-8, and then I went to public high school, and it was always that way. And I think that what, and I know this is a long way to answer your question, but here's the reason I spend so much time on this is because that was my experience in high school. And that is the exact same experience that my son has in high school. Like we're 30 years, right? It's like I graduated high school in 1993. We're 30 something years later, and it's the teaching is the exact same as I was in high school. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, I didn't even have cell phones when I was in high school.
Right.
And now there's AI and there's Desmos, and every kid has a device, and like the world is so different. The things that kids need is so different. What's happening? Why is my kid doing the same thing that I did 30 something years ago? And that's why I make this long story about my experience, because I know you're going to hint at that. And my experience was the same. And I want my kids to have something different than I.
Yeah. And I won't belabor my experience, but it was pretty much exactly prototypical to what you shared. And I have the exact same sentiment. And I think, so to talk a little bit about mathematical discourse, right? A quote that I heard, and I think this, if every teacher, if everyone teaching math had this in their mind, it would completely change math teaching practices across the country.
Okay, everybody,
It's this simple
get
phrase.
ready. You got to hear this so you can keep it in your mind. Go ahead.
Whoever's doing the talking is the one that's doing the learning,
Absolutely.
right? If the teacher's the one that's talking the whole time, they're the one that's actually learning. It's talking is a form of learning. And so I'm going to say that again. Whoever is doing the talking is the one doing the learning. It's that simple, right? And there's actually a neuroscience basis for this, right? So I shared that we're a neuroscience research organization. We study how the brain learns, and we build all of our programs based on these findings. Now, there are aspects of the brain that don't need to engage in language and discourse to learn mathematics. Actually, the heart of our program is all around spatial temporal mathematics, where we remove the language and just focus on kids engaging in active problem solving, and we remove any language barriers. And it's amazing because it opens up access for so many students. However, if you do want to engage in whole brain learning, there are components of the brain, specifically the Wernicke's and Broca's regions of your brain, that will only activate and fire when engaged in language processing and discourse, right? So if you want to engage your whole brain, and this is why, we have a one-to-one component, we have kids engage independently in problem solving, but that's not the only part of our solution. We also have this puzzle talks component, which is where kids now have conversations around the puzzles that they just engaged in. And it's those conversations where kids are it's called sense making, right? There's a metacognition that happens when you have to talk about your own thinking, when you have to explain your own reasoning. It deepens your level of understanding. It's part of why they say like teaching is the highest form of learning, because you really have to show your understanding when you're able to teach something. And that's why discourse is so important. And then on top of that, I mean, it's a 21st century skill. If you're using any mathematical problem solving in any professional and even personal work setting, collaboration and discourse is critical skill to learn. And mathematics classrooms is one of the core places you can actually grow and learn in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, thank you for all the stuff that you provided us today in the podcast. I have a couple more questions as we go forward. So, a lot of my listeners have been using strategies in building thinking classrooms by Peter Liljedahl. I've had Peter on here a couple of times. I have a lot of listeners that are on a Facebook group that use BTC to as some of their structures that they use in their classroom. I've had a podcast before where I've talked about using digital tools with that style. And so, but I still see a lot of questions online about like, well, my kids are vertical whiteboards. How do I integrate technology tools? And I know that since I had a bit of an ed tech expert on today, and we've talked about Discourse, which is a lot of what BTC works on, is getting kids to talk and being in groups and working in that space. Do you have any ideas on how teachers can integrate some technology tools into their classrooms as students are working collaboratively on vertical whiteboards?
Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, I love the principles with building thinking classrooms. The vertical whiteboard is a amazing. I mean, we use this professionally as if you want to engage in collaborative problem solving, right? You're not sitting on a piece of paper, right? Let's go whiteboard this. There's something about that that just automatically creates collaboration and discourse. And I love that you were sharing earlier that you do this in your home, that
Yeah.
you have a whiteboard, a vertical whiteboard, where you do math problems at home and we'll put math problems up. And I love that. That's amazing. It's, I think, so two thoughts here, right? I mean, people, when they think about ed tech, oftentimes want to think about like, what's the most sophisticated tool? And really what you want to look for is honestly, what's the simplest tool that can enhance the learning here? We've all got these devices. We've all got these cell phones. Just taking a picture of the work that kids are doing in order to then, put it up on a larger display. Because, so building thinking classrooms, amazing ideas, a lot of great components to it. It's not always, as I'm sure you've experienced, like it's not always practical in your classroom to get kids working in vertical surfaces. It can be practical and very helpful to have like one screen, a larger screen that kids are focused on. And so that's where, honestly, it goes back to my favorite technique for engaging discourse. You could just use your camera, take a picture of two bodies of work, put them up next to each other, say what's similar and what's different. Automatically, kids are going to start talking. And that parallels what, where I also like to use digital interactive classroom technology, whereas if you're not working on the vertical surfaces, you can kind of do the same thing, and kids are working, pull two bodies of work up, pair them together, and ask kids to compare and contrast those. So, but that's,
Yeah.
maybe you weren't expecting that from the ed tech side, but it's funny how much, the simpler the better to solve the problem.
Yeah, no, I totally understand and agree. I think teachers tend to overthink how they're using technology a lot. And it really is just a tool for students to learn, right? Thank you so much, Kai, for being on the podcast today. Before we end here, I want you to just give the listeners how they can either get a hold of you or contact, or what your work is, and throw a quick plug out there for Mind Education on some of the resources that teachers can go and get from Mind.
Totally. So visit our website, mindresearch.org, for any information that you need. Or actually, mindeducation.org. We moved recently from Mind Research to Mind Education. So go to mindeducation.org. You can find on there access to those free puzzle talks that I talked about, where you can engage in classroom discourse using puzzles, visual puzzles. And, ST Math, we didn't talk about that a lot, but it's an amazing program where kids are able to engage and persevere in problem solving across all topics. And look out for our Insight Math, which is our new core curriculum that we just launched and are going around the country, going around states and sharing. So we're very, very much looking forward to having more conversations about this.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Kai, for joining us on Teaching That Counts. And this is, like I said, this is our last episode of the season. And so listeners out there, I hope you come back for next season when we focus on those 8 effective math teaching practices. That'll be the first 8 months, and then we'll wrap up with some really great guests all the way through. So thank you for joining us. Thank you again, Kai, for being here. Thank you again, listeners. Teaching That Counts, and come back next time.
Thanks for having me. Such a pleasure.